Welcome to Kitchen Table Conversations, a series of short and shareable conversation starters for those of us who have or love and support people with a complicated and beautiful brain. Here's your host, Angela Geddes.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Kitchen Table Conversations. Thanks again for tuning in today. And once again, if you do appreciate what you're listening to, I encourage you to share amongst your friends, because the goal here is to bring some of these really important conversations back home to our kitchen tables to help debunk some myths and to help just facilitate really, really good conversations to broaden our understanding and maybe even our compassion or empathy towards ourselves and towards the people that we love the most. And sometimes the people in our communities that maybe we don't necessarily understand as clearly as we think we do. I think life is a series of learning opportunities, and I try really hard to take advantage of as many as possible. And I really, really do appreciate learning from others, and I like to surround myself with people who do see and do things differently than me, because that's how we learn, and that's how we can appreciate some of the diversity that our families and our circles and our communities and our world actually presents us with. So one of the things that I want to talk about today is assertive communication, and how do we advocate for ourselves. So you know that I'm a social worker. You know that a big part of the role that I do in helping people is to advocate for more doors to be opened, and so that we continue to build communities and support systems that are more inclusive of everyone. And it's really interesting because I can remember when I started, when I rebranded and had some help creating my website, the person who did such a beautiful job was suggesting that I add some groups and coalitions and memberships and some logos at the bottom of my page to indicate that I am an ally, or I'm a supporter of Black Lives Matter, for example, or the LGBTQ++ communities. And I really struggled with that because I am an ally. And I do feel like I offer inclusive services as much as my personal awareness allows me to, and my passions allow me to. So I realize that I am a flawed individual, and I don't know everything, and I don't know what I don't know in some circumstances, which is natural. But I also know that as a social worker, my goal is to support, to be open to support everyone. And if there is an area that I'm not well versed in, then I need to either get more information and knowledge and gain some expertise and experience, or I need to refer on. But everyone is welcome in my center and in my community. So I felt that as soon as I start to acknowledge my connection to or my support of any specific group, there's a risk that I will be excluding others. And I think that that's really important. So again, a big part of my job is to make sure that my environment is warm and welcoming. And I do so by, supporting everyone's journey. And part of that journey is helping individuals and family members build some of the skills that they need in order to make their walk in their journey a little bit lighter and a little bit easier, a little bit more inclusive, and with a real sense that they are understood and that they have a sense of belonging. So again, one of those things is, how do we talk about self-advocacy? How do we have meetings with schools, for example, as parents who are naturally very emotional because they're in to see the school and the special education teachers, for example, or the principals, because there's been a problem of some sort identified. And if this continues to be problematic, I have often seen as a helper kind of an us against them sort of attitude, because when we are talking about our children, we do wear our hearts on our sleeves. There are some of us that are more objective than others and can see more clearly when our children are struggling and are making poor decisions or poor choices, for example, or when they're really struggling with something that's, learning based or brain based or neurodevelopmental based. but those circumstances are still hard for parents to see and to witness and to experience the after effects at home, and the way that these challenges at school, for example, can impact the individuals and the family members, like their view of themselves and their view of the world and their role within it. So naturally, families are a little bit emotional and they're wanting to find solutions, but sometimes the way we express ourselves can be a little bit, angry or confrontational or demanding. And then we've got the school system that have, passionate teachers and individuals and support people who really want the best for all children. I mean, they wouldn't be doing this work if that's not what their overall goal was and what they, went to school for, and continue to invest both time, personal time, educational opportunities, and invest their own resources and money to buy and to create really innovative school programming. So I see a lot of real passion and expertise on both sides, but there often is this perceived and real conflict when we have to go to a school meeting to problem solve. So my goal, again, is to help as a helper, is to go into those meetings acknowledging what both sides bring to the table and make sure that both sides are heard and respected, and that communication remains helpful. And by helpful, I mean assertive. And so how do we advocate for what we need without putting other people on the defensive, or blaming or seemingly blaming others for not doing enough? Because as soon as we feel blamed, we have a tendency to shut down, right? So again, advocacy is a huge piece, and I just see that there's so many opportunities for it to go sideways. And so I work with a number of our military vets, for example, who have a real fear of advocating for themselves or expressing any kind of vulnerability, because there may be some repercussions, and whether that's perceived or real. The bottom line is, you go into the military to, fight for freedom and to advocate in some of the biggest and most important ways. And they are, very strong and capable and well-trained individuals. And expressing vulnerability comes with consequence. It means sometimes if you are hurt, you can't do the work that you're trained to do. Maybe people will intervene. And there's also the perception that people are going to see you might be a little bit weaker. I've supported a number of people and talked to a number of people who just, have hidden their anxiety or their symptoms of PTSD for years and years and years. I mean, I'm talking 20 to 30 years, because of the fear of being perceived as weak. I've also seen some people who have hidden some of their work-related injuries because they knew that they would be the squeaky wheel, for example, at work, or not really understood or well supported if they weren't valuable to management or valuable to the military, for example. And again, those of you who know me know that I work very, very closely with a number of very resilient individuals and families who experience the impacts of prenatal alcohol exposure and other developmental conditions. And, we know that with any diagnosis, the prognosis is best when people understand what the diagnosis is and what the implications of that diagnosis are. And it's also helpful if your close circle is aware, and maybe your employers are aware of what differences you may be experiencing, whether that be diabetes or whether that be cancer or whether that be a broken leg, or whether it's a mental health condition or a complex neurodevelopmental disability. However, again, there is this there's this fear, of being seen as weak or different, and there is a natural stigma that still continues to exist. So with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, for example, there's still so many misunderstandings around what that really means. And it wasn't very long ago that when I mentioned fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, the person that I was speaking to understood that to be a brain-based condition based on their own alcohol consumption. they sort of miss the whole prenatal piece of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So that's a big deal, because then there again, even though addictions is very real and there's no room for blame, there was an underpinning of this person did it to themselves, so to speak, when we talked about this condition. So, and then there's also people who do experience fetal alcohol spectrum disorder who, really just don't like the name of it, don't like the association of alcohol at all, don't like that their biological family members are harshly judged because of what's taken place. And then there's other family members and individuals who have FASD that are actually still processing a lot of the grief and the anger that's associated with this. So how do we advocate for ourselves when we're still experiencing so much emotional turmoil around the whole condition, whether it's a recent diagnosis or whether it's a diagnosis that's not been clearly understood for many years and we're still experiencing some of the more difficult and challenging implications of it. So I know of people who have FASD that just do not want people to know, and even some that speak publicly that would just prefer to be known as their first name, because they know for a fact that employers will take a second look and maybe a third look, and maybe they will be overlooked if they do a Google search and find their name with a known condition next, or an actually largely misunderstood understanding of the condition beside their name if they did a Google search. So those things are really, really important to understand and to accept and work with, I guess. So how do we help people advocate for what they need while still securing their own confidentiality and their own level of safety in terms of what people know about them and what they don't. But again, everybody does better if I'm diabetic and I pretend I don't have it while I'm at work, and then I go into a health-related or a diabetes-related health scare, and nobody around me knows to help me with an extra chocolate bar or a drink of juice or something like that, then my prognosis is going to be worse. If people don't understand why I'm suddenly very tired, for example, or I'm experiencing the effects of chemotherapy during an outpatient treatment, and I'm still trying to go to work, and people don't understand why I'm a little bit foggy potentially, or I don't know what the symptoms might be, but regardless, I think you're getting the point. If people don't understand it, they're going to be more quick to judge harshly. Whereas if they understand that I have a condition that I'm being treated for right now, then more supports will be around me so that I can experience more success. And that's a win-win for everyone. But again, there's still that bias. So how do we balance the assertive communication, the self-advocacy with all of these other fear of judgments and fear of being misunderstood? So here are a few tips for some assertive communication that will help with self-advocacy. And again, I would encourage you to check back in with the website, because there'll be some articles there to further your reading or your understanding if you so desire. But to start, just, the goal here is to aim for open, safe, fairly direct conversation, but yet really honest and kind. The goal here always is to listen. I used to say to some of the kids that I supported is that we have 2 ears and only 1 mouth, which means we should be listening at least twice as much as we talk. And I think if we all adopt that kind of method and really listen with the intent to understand and empathize, understand the limitations or where the other person is coming from, and also try to understand that everybody's doing their best. It might not be the best, it might not be what works the best, but people are trying their best. And there's a distinct difference there. And I think if we come at conflict or conversations that need to be worked through with that understanding, I think communication will be smoother and outcomes will be much better. So I think it's important to value your own needs and your own rights, as well as the rights of other people. So when we're talking about school, for example, in a school meeting that we often see transpire with some real difficulties. We do have to respect our own rights, but we also have to understand that teachers have 25 to 30 kids in their room, and many teachers have individual education plans to adhere to for a number of children, and far more than what we used to even a decade ago is what I'm hearing. So those are extra accommodations that are absolutely necessary, and teachers want to do them, but it's not always easy to do, and it's not always easy to orchestrate as neatly and tidily as we have it written down on an individual education plan, for example. So some things don't always go, but if we put ourselves into the shoes of others, sometimes that's really helpful. And we really do need to accept that we cannot control other people. We can just, at best, positively influence and encourage, but we cannot control. And certainly coming at people with a real aggressive stance is likely going to close more doors than it opens. But yet it is important to know and protect our own boundaries and the boundaries of other people. And when other people sense that you're prioritizing their boundaries, their rights, and their feelings, doors open. And again, expressing our feelings and our needs very respectfully, communicating calmly, and I notice this really like quite a bit within my fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and neurodivergent communities, and that I think there's been just such a long history of individuals and families being misunderstood, dismissed, diverted, re-referred, just not being heard and blamed and shamed, that there is a bit of a chip on many people's shoulders when we do enter some of these meetings, because our history is coming forward and we know we're going to have to argue, or we're going to have to defend, or we're going to have to retell our stories again and again and again, and people are not going to understand us. And people are going to call us helicopter parents and blame us for all kinds of things that are not ours to be responsible for. So I think there is that caution, and I often will try to work that through with the people that I'm supporting, again, so that we get to where we need to be, and that is self-advocacy, getting what we need without closing any doors or upsetting other people. And then also walking away from a circumstance going, oh my gosh, I don't feel very good about my contribution to that conversation. The fact of the matter is we have every right to be frustrated with the system, be frustrated potentially individually with teachers who have made some big mistakes. And I've been on that end of it too. But how do we communicate in a way that actually people want to listen to? And I think that's a gift. And I used to work with a family doctor at the West Elgin Community Health Center. And I remember, sending him a message, or going into his office actually after a really tenuous meeting and saying, I really appreciate your communication style, and that you say even difficult things in a way that makes people want to listen to you. And I think that's a gift, and I think that's an important piece that does come with effective self-advocacy. So always remember that your needs are important, your rights are important, your boundaries are important, and so are everyone else's. And most of the time, communication, 95% of the time, in my opinion, is based on miscommunication and misunderstanding, and not necessarily intention. So with that, I encourage you to go back to my website for some further reading about how we can stand up for ourselves and make sure that we do that in all communities. I focus today on schools and family meetings, because that's primarily a lot of the work that I do. But I also see some real need for advocacy in our medical system as well. And there's a number of examples of in one article in particular in Psychology Today that talked about some real dangerous situations that could have resulted had individuals not stood up for their rights and knew in their own heart that something else was wrong, despite being dismissed by some of the medical practitioners that they'd come across. So again, thanks so much for tuning in. From my kitchen table to yours, Angela.